She's always been the disgrace of this family. My mother said it into a microphone at my cousin's engagement banquet. The room fell silent. Crystal glasses froze mid-air. 200 guests watched as she smiled warmly at my brother standing beside her, soaking in applause like he just saved a kingdom from ruin. 6 hours earlier, I had wired $1.8 million from my personal savings account to settle the lawsuit that would have exposed his financial fraud and destroyed our family's construction company forever. The money represented 12 years of careful investing, late nights consulting, and every bonus I had ever earned. I had transferred it all without hesitation because I thought family meant something. Instead, they gave him the credit. My throat burned as I sat at the back table, watching relatives nod approvingly. My father wouldn't even look in my direction. The applause grew louder as my brother raised his glass, accepting praise for solving a crisis he had created. My name is Camille Bennett, and that was the exact moment I realized my family didn't want a daughter. They wanted a scapegoat with a bank account. Someone to fix their problems quietly while they celebrated publicly. That night everything changed. 6 hours before that humiliating toast, I sat alone in my car outside the law office on Hamilton Street. My hands were shaking as I reviewed the settlement documents one final time. The lawsuit was completely airtight. The attorneys had compiled months of evidence showing embezzlement trails, vendor kickbacks, and falsified invoices. My brother's signature appeared on every single fraudulent document. The settlement window was closing at 5 o'clock that afternoon. If we missed it, everything would become public record by Monday morning. The company would face criminal investigations. My parents would lose their business, their reputation, and probably their house. Creditors would come after everything they owned. Our family name would be destroyed across the entire construction industry. So I authorized the wire transfer with one very specific condition: a secured private loan agreement with detailed collateral clauses attached to every dollar. My attorney had drafted it carefully, burying the important provisions deep in the legal language. The terms were crystal clear to anyone who actually read past page 2. But I knew my family. They never read the fine print. They just wanted the problem to disappear. And I made it disappear, protecting them from consequences they absolutely deserved. The thing is, I wasn't even surprised by their behavior anymore. This pattern had been repeating itself for years. When my brother crashed a company truck at 19 years old while driving drunk, I quietly paid the $8,000 insurance gap so it wouldn't go on record. Nobody thanked me then either. They just acted like the problem had solved itself. When he lost $400,000 in a failed real estate flip 3 years ago, I refinanced my condo to inject cash into the company books and stabilize our financial statements. I told the bank it was for renovations. My credit score dropped, but the family business survived another quarter. My parents never acknowledged what I had sacrificed. I became the family's quiet fixer by default. The responsible one. The boring one who chose financial consulting over the glamorous construction business. While my brother drove luxury cars and took clients to expensive dinners, I lived modestly and saved aggressively. Every dollar mattered to me because I knew eventually they would need rescuing again. He was the golden son who could do no wrong. I was just Camille, dependable and invisible. And honestly, I was exhausted from carrying their weight. At the engagement banquet, after my mother finished her speech praising my brother's fictional heroics, my cousin Vanessa leaned close to me. She had always been perceptive. "Why do they treat you like this?" she whispered, genuine confusion in her voice. "You're the one who actually holds everything together." I almost told her the truth right then. But what would I say? That my family needed someone to blame for their own failures? That I represented everything they couldn't control? That my success in finance made them uncomfortable because it highlighted their mismanagement? That I knew too many secrets they wanted buried? The real answer was simpler and more painful. I wasn't controllable like my brother. I asked difficult questions. I reviewed contracts before signing them. I understood financial statements and spotted irregularities immediately. I had inherited our grandmother's sharp mind and independent spirit. Those qualities made me valuable as a fixer but dangerous as a family member. Because I knew the numbers. And numbers never lie, even when people do. My brother could charm investors and manipulate conversations, but balance sheets don't care about charisma. The truth always lived in the documentation, and I had kept every single record. After my mother's toast ended, I stood up quietly and walked toward the exit. My chair scraped against the floor, but nobody turned to look. The celebration continued without me as if I had never been there. Relatives laughed and clinked glasses. The band started playing again. My parents accepted congratulations from business associates. I walked through the banquet hall doors and kept walking. Through the lobby with its crystal chandeliers. Past the coat check where my jacket still hung. Out into the parking lot where early autumn air hit my face. Not one person followed me. Not even my father, who had at least shown hints of guilt during my mother's speech. But before I reached my car, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sound made my stomach drop even though I was expecting it. I opened the message and felt my suspicions confirmed. A corporate filing notification from the company's legal department. They had scheduled an emergency board vote for next Tuesday morning. My name wasn't on the attendee list. This was a private meeting. About me. Without me. After everything I had just sacrificed, they were already making moves. I sat in my car and read the attached documents twice, processing what they were actually planning. The filing outlined something they called an emergency restructuring proposal, designed to stabilize the company's governance after the recent financial crisis. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but I understood corporate language. I had reviewed hundreds of similar documents in my consulting career. The real meaning was buried in Section 4. My ownership shares were being diluted under special provisions that only activated during financial emergencies. The exact emergency I had just resolved using my own money. They were using the funds I injected to restructure my stake into something meaningless. Technical language disguised the betrayal, but I saw it clearly. Within 6 months, my 15% ownership would become less than 3%. My voting rights would disappear completely. I would be removed from the board of directors. The company my grandmother helped build, the company I had saved repeatedly, would legally erase me while keeping my money. They weren't just humiliating me publicly anymore. They were systematically removing me from the family business using my own bailout as the justification. The restructuring would happen during the confusion following the lawsuit settlement. Nobody would question emergency measures during a crisis. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I should have felt betrayed or heartbroken. Instead, I felt something colder settle into place. Clarity. I forwarded the filing documents to my attorney, Harrison Wells, who had handled my personal legal matters for 5 years. He was expensive but brilliant, and more importantly, he actually read every word of every contract. Unlike my family, Harrison understood that details determined outcomes in legal battles. My phone rang within 3 minutes. "Camille," Harrison said slowly, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Did they actually sign the loan agreement without reading past the first 2 pages?" "You know my family," I replied, watching rain start to fall on my windshield. "They only see what they want to see." "Then they missed something critical," he continued. "You didn't just give them a loan. You secured it against the company headquarters building on Morrison Avenue. The property is worth $3.2 million. Plus, your parents and brother all signed personal guarantees without realizing what they meant. I had structured everything carefully while my family assumed I was just being helpful. The loan agreement looks simple on the surface, just emergency family assistance. But buried in the legal provisions were protection mechanisms they never bothered to examine, because they never imagined I would actually enforce them. "What are my options?" I asked. Harrison's answer changed everything. 3 days after the engagement banquet, my mother invited me to dinner at Antonio's, the expensive Italian restaurant downtown where our family celebrated major occasions. She smiled when I arrived, the same warm expression she used with business associates and distant relatives. Completely fake. We ordered wine. She asked about my work. Made small talk about the weather. Complimented my dress. Felt like watching a performance. Finally, after the appetizers arrived, she dropped the pretense. "You've seemed emotional lately, sweetheart. Maybe it would be better if you step back from company involvement for a while. Just until things stabilize." She slid a document across the white tablecloth toward me. I didn't need to read it. I knew exactly what it contained. A voluntary resignation from the board of directors, effective immediately. Pre-signed witness statements. Legal language about mutual agreements and amicable separations. They wanted me to disappear quietly. To walk away from my ownership stake without fighting. To accept my role as the family problem solver, who eventually became a problem herself. Sign this paper, stay silent, and maybe they would still invite me to holiday dinners. Maybe. I looked at the document but didn't touch it. I'll need time to think about this. My mother's smile tightened just slightly. Of course, dear. Take your time. You know, my mother continued softly, refilling her wine glass, you've always been a bit unstable emotionally. Even as a child. You imagine slights where none exist. You see conspiracies in normal family dynamics. Maybe therapy would help. I stared at her across the table. She was gaslighting me. Actually rewriting reality while looking me directly in the eyes. I had just transferred nearly $2 million to save their company from a lawsuit caused by my brother's fraud. Yet somehow, I was the unstable one for feeling hurt about being called a disgrace publicly. I saved the company, I said quietly. You know I did. You helped, she corrected gently, as if talking to a confused child. But your brother coordinated everything. He negotiated with the attorneys. He structured the settlement. You just contributed financially, which we appreciate. But let's be honest about who actually solved the crisis. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loudly. Not with tears or shouting. Just a quiet, clean break. Like cutting a rope that had been strangling me for 32 years. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, to prove my worth, to belong in my own family. I was done. Completely done. The decision settled into my bones with absolute certainty. The next morning, I activated the loan agreement's default prevention clause. Harrison filed formal notice with the company's legal department and copied the board of directors. The language was technical but the meaning was clear. Due to governance breach concerns, the loan was now classified as immediately callable unless certain conditions were met. The conditions were simple. Any attempt to alter my equity stake without explicit written consent would trigger a 72-hour repayment window. If they proceeded with the restructuring vote, they would have 3 days to return the full $1.8 million plus accrued interest. I knew they didn't have that kind of liquidity. The lawsuit settlement had drained available cash reserves. Their credit lines were nearly maxed. The quarterly contractor payments were due. They had spent my money almost immediately to cover existing debts and keep operations running smoothly. Calling the loan would force them to either abandon the restructuring plan or face immediate financial collapse. They would have to choose between erasing me or surviving. And they had 48 hours to make that choice. Harrison had prepared everything perfectly. The loan agreement was legally airtight. My documentation was impeccable. Every clause had been carefully constructed to protect my interests while appearing generous on the surface. They had signed willingly, never suspecting I would actually enforce the terms. My brother stormed into my downtown office the next afternoon. He didn't knock. He just burst through my door, face red with anger. Expensive suit rumpled from driving across the city in rush hour traffic. My assistant tried to stop him but I waved her away. This confrontation was inevitable. You're trying to destroy us, he shouted, slamming his hand on my desk. Your own family. Over what? Hurt feelings? Because Mom made one joke at a party. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him calmly. Really looked at him. My older brother who had coasted through life on charm and family connections. Who had never faced real consequences for anything. Who genuinely believed the world owed him success. No, I said quietly. I saved you. You're the one trying to erase me. There's a difference. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Something in my expression must have registered. I wasn't angry or emotional. I was stating facts. Cold, documented facts backed by legal contracts he had signed without reading. For the first time in our entire relationship, my brother looked genuinely afraid. Not of consequences for his fraud. Not of losing the company. He was afraid of me. Because he finally realized I wasn't bluffing. The emergency board meeting happened exactly as scheduled. Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock sharp. But this time I attended. Harrison had sent formal notice asserting my rights as a shareholder and board member. They couldn't legally exclude me, though my mother tried. The conference room fell silent when I walked in. My father sat at the head of the table, suddenly looking much older. My brother slouched in his chair, avoiding eye contact. The external board directors, 3 experienced businessmen my grandmother had appointed years ago, looked confused about why I hadn't been initially invited. My mother started to speak. Perhaps we should postpone this until... No, interrupted Paul Hendricks, the board chairman. He was 70 years old, retired from a successful career in commercial development, and had zero patience for family drama interfering with business operations. We need to address some serious concerns that have come to light. I had emailed him privately the night before. Attached the complete payment receipt showing my personal funds saved the company. Included the timeline of events. Copied the restructuring proposal that would have diluted my shares. Paul had spent 40 years reading corporate documents. He understood exactly what was happening. Why weren't board members informed about the lawsuit settlement source? Paul asked, looking directly at my parents. Why wasn't this financial transaction properly documented in company records? Silence filled the room. I stood and walked to the front of the conference room. My laptop was already connected to the projector. First, I displayed the wire transfer receipt. $1.8 million. From my personal Wells Fargo account. Dated last Thursday, 3 hours before the settlement deadline. Sent directly to the plaintiff's attorneys. The timestamp was clear. The amount was undeniable. The board members leaned forward, studying the details. Next, I projected the fraud evidence I had quietly compiled over the previous 6 months. Bank statements showing vendor kickbacks routed to offshore accounts. Invoices with inflated amounts and unexplained discrepancies. Email threads discussing payment manipulation. My brother's digital signature on every suspicious document. The evidence I had suppressed to protect the family. The evidence I had hidden to avoid public scandal. The evidence that proved this crisis wasn't bad luck or market conditions. It was deliberate fraud. The conference room went completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Traffic noise from the street below. Someone's coffee cup settling on the wooden table. The silence grew heavier with each passing second as the external board members absorbed the implications. My mother tried to interrupt. This is taken out of context. Paul held up his hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. Why weren't we informed about any of this? His voice was hard, professional, done with family politics. Because control mattered more than transparency, I said quietly, advancing to the next slide. Because acknowledging the truth would mean acknowledging whose fraud created this crisis. Because admitting I saved the company would undermine the narrative they needed to maintain. I displayed the restructuring proposal. Highlighted the sections that would dilute my ownership using emergency provisions. Showed how the timeline coincided perfectly with my bailout payment. The external directors passed the documents between them, reading carefully. You were going to eliminate her stake, Paul said slowly, looking at my parents. Using funds she personally provided. Without disclosure. Without board approval. Without even inviting her to this meeting. My father finally spoke. We were trying to protect the company's future leadership structure. By betraying the person who saved it, Paul replied flatly. That's not protection. That's theft. The other external directors nodded agreement. The family's carefully constructed narrative was collapsing in real time. Everything they had planned in private was now exposed under professional scrutiny. The corporate structure couldn't hide what the family dynamics had enabled. My brother stared at the table. My mother's hands were shaking. My father looked smaller somehow, diminished by the truth finally being spoken aloud in a room where business law mattered more than family hierarchy. That afternoon, the bank called my father's cell phone. They needed updated collateral verification for the company's expansion credit line. Standard procedure during financial transitions. But once their legal department reviewed the secured loan agreement I had filed, everything changed. The headquarters building on Morrison Avenue was now encumbered. My loan held first position security interest. The bank's existing credit line was suddenly in second position behind my claim. That changed their risk assessment dramatically and immediately. They froze the expansion credit within 2 hours. Called in their senior commercial lending officer to review the situation. Demanded complete financial disclosure of the recent lawsuit settlement and its funding source. Asked pointed questions about why the board hadn't been informed about major financial transactions. My father called me that evening. His voice sounded small and tired over the phone. defeated. Why are you doing this to us, Camille? We're your family. Why are you being so vindictive? I sat in my apartment, looking out at the city lights, and answered honestly. You taught me that contracts matter more than feelings. That business decisions require careful documentation. That promises mean nothing without legal backing. I'm just applying the lessons you taught me. There was a long silence on the other end. I never meant for you to use those lessons against us. Then you shouldn't have tried to erase me. They staged what they called an intervention that weekend. Family gathering at my parents' house. My aunts and uncles were there. My cousins. Even my grandmother on my father's side, who rarely involved herself in family business matters. The narrative was clear before I even walked through the door. I was jealous of my brother. Bitter about not being included in company operations. Mentally unstable and acting irrationally. Making business decisions based on hurt feelings instead of family loyalty. They each took turns expressing concern about my behavior. You're tearing this family apart, my Aunt Patricia said sadly, shaking her head. Over money. Is that really worth it? This isn't about money, I replied calmly. This is about being erased from something I helped build while being called a disgrace publicly. There's a difference. Your mother didn't mean it that way, my uncle insisted. You're being oversensitive. You always have been. But this time I had prepared differently. My phone was in my jacket pocket, recording everything. Every accusation. Every attempt to rewrite history. Every moment they tried to gaslight me into accepting their version of reality. Harrison had advised documenting everything during family interactions. Evidence mattered in legal proceedings. I listened quietly. Didn't argue. Just let them talk themselves into corners. Over the next week, relatives I barely knew started calling my cell phone. Apparently, I was now trying to steal the family legacy, according to the whisper campaign spreading through our extended family. Cousins sent concerned text messages. Former family friends left voicemails asking what was really happening. The word legacy kept appearing in these conversations. Interesting choice. Because I had built a significant portion of that legacy. My financial consulting had brought in major commercial clients. My reputation in the industry opened doors the family name alone couldn't. I had personally recruited 2 board members and negotiated supplier contracts that saved millions. But legacy apparently meant something different to them. It meant maintaining the image they wanted, protecting my brother's future despite his incompetence, keeping me in a supporting role where I provided value without claiming recognition. Legacy meant control over the narrative, not acknowledgement of actual contributions. My cousin Vanessa called me privately. They're lying about you, she said bluntly. Everyone who actually works with the company knows you've been holding things together. Don't let them rewrite this. Her support meant more than she probably realized. At least someone in the family was willing to see the truth. The 72-hour repayment window expired at 5 p.m. on Friday. Harrison had sent formal notice to the company's legal counsel and all board members. The terms were clear. They couldn't repay the loan. The company didn't have sufficient liquid assets after the settlement payment and operational expenses, which meant the secured collateral provisions automatically activated. The loan agreement granted me legal claim to controlling interest in the company headquarters building. Personal guarantees from my parents and brother became immediately enforceable. Their personal assets were now legally exposed. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply filed the necessary paperwork with the county clerk's office and notified the board chairman. Harrison handled everything professionally by the book, following procedures they couldn't challenge. My attorney presented them with 2 clear options during a private meeting. First option: voluntary restructuring under my leadership with full operational authority. Independent audit of all financial records. New management structure with accountability measures. Or second option: I could release the complete fraud file to regulatory authorities and force a public investigation. The sealed evidence file still existed. Tax authorities would be very interested in those offshore accounts. Business licensing boards would investigate the fraudulent invoicing. My brother would likely face criminal charges. The choice was theirs. My brother called me at 11 o'clock that night. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up the phone. Maybe curiosity about what he would say. Maybe hope for some glimpse of genuine remorse or understanding. Please, he said, and his voice was shaking. Don't destroy Dad. He worked his whole life building this company. It'll kill him to lose everything. That was the first time he didn't say us. He said Dad. Because somewhere in his entitled, selfish mind, my brother actually understood who had caused this disaster. He knew his fraud had created the crisis. He knew his arrogance had made it worse. He knew he deserved consequences. But he was asking me to protect our father from those consequences. To sacrifice my own justice so Dad wouldn't suffer for enabling and covering up my brother's crimes. You should have thought about that before committing fraud, I said quietly. Or before trying to erase me from the company I saved. Or before standing there accepting credit for something I did. This is your fault, not mine. I know, he whispered. And for once he sounded sincere. I know it is. But please, don't destroy the company. Don't destroy Dad. I hung up without answering. Some decisions couldn't be made during late-night emotional phone calls. The emergency board vote happened the following Monday morning. Paul Hendricks called the meeting to order precisely at 9 a.m. All board members attended, including the external directors who had spent the weekend reviewing documentation and consulting their own attorneys. The motion was straightforward. Remove my brother from all financial authority within the company. Immediate termination of his signing privileges. Restricted access to accounting systems and client accounts. Effective immediately pending a complete forensic audit. The vote was unanimous. 5 votes in favor. 0 opposed. My parents abstained but didn't vote against it. They knew they couldn't defend his actions anymore. The evidence was too clear. Second motion. Force my father into early retirement from daily operations. Transition to Chairman Emeritus, which was basically a meaningless title with no real authority. Hand over operational control to prevent further mismanagement. That vote was 4 in favor, 1 abstention. My father didn't vote on his own removal. My mother looked like she might be sick. Third motion. Revoke my mother's executive access to financial systems and client databases. She had enabled too much by looking the other way. The board couldn't trust her judgment anymore. 3 in favor, 2 abstentions. She sat perfectly still, face blank, processing that her power was being legally stripped away in front of witnesses. The family group chat exploded within an hour. My phone buzzed constantly with incoming messages. Aunts calling me heartless and vindictive. Cousins saying I would regret destroying family relationships over business disagreements. Uncles accusing me of power-hungry betrayal. You've torn this family apart, one message read. Grandmother would be ashamed of you. That one actually made me laugh bitterly. Grandmother would have been proud. She had been the real builder, the tough negotiator who started the company with nothing. She taught me that business required both compassion and steel. That family loyalty didn't mean accepting abuse. But none of these relatives had attended board meetings. None of them knew about my brother's fraud. None of them had seen the evidence or understood the legal implications. They just believed whatever narrative my parents told them. The prodigal daughter destroying the family business out of jealousy. But privately, my inbox told a different story. 3 major investors emailed congratulations. Business associates who actually understood corporate governance sent supportive messages. Industry contacts who had questioned our management suddenly expressed renewed confidence. They preferred stability and transparency over ego and family drama. They wanted competent leadership, not political theater. And they recognized what the family refused to acknowledge. I was the only reason the company still existed. The truth leaked 2 weeks later. A former employee anonymously posted on an industry forum about financial irregularities that had been quietly settled. They didn't name names or provide specific details. Just vague hints about embezzlement and family cover-ups. The construction industry is surprisingly small. People talk. Word spreads quickly. Within days, reporters started asking questions. Business journalists contacted the company for comment. The narrative my family had carefully constructed began unraveling in public. Suddenly, I wasn't the disgrace trying to steal the legacy. I was the whistleblower who had prevented total collapse. The financial expert who had caught fraud before it destroyed everything. The responsible family member who chose accountability over enabling. Former clients reached out expressing support. Suppliers who had suspected problems thanked me privately for addressing issues they couldn't prove. Competitors actually showed respect, which was rare in our industry. The court of public opinion shifted dramatically. Not completely, but enough. Enough that my family's version of events no longer held unchallenged authority. Enough that people started asking harder questions about what had really happened. My mother tried calling me after the first article appeared online. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. In a quiet office downtown, I signed the final ownership transfer documents. No television cameras. No family drama. No celebration or applause. Just me, Harrison, and a notary public in a small conference room with gray walls and fluorescent lighting. The controlling interest in Bennett Construction officially transferred to my name. 51% ownership. Operational authority. Final decision-making power over all major business decisions. The company my grandmother helped establish, that my grandfather built, that I had saved repeatedly, now belonged primarily to me. The headquarters building on Morrison Avenue legally became mine through the secured loan enforcement. The property deed reflected the change. $3.2 million in real estate equity that my family had signed away without realizing what they were doing. Harrison handed me the final page. "This is what protecting yourself looks like," he said simply. "You didn't destroy them. You just stopped letting them destroy you." I signed my name clearly at the bottom of the document. The pen felt heavy. This decision would change everything forever. Family relationships couldn't survive this shift in power dynamics. But I had spent 32 years trying to earn their approval. That strategy hadn't worked. Maybe it was time to choose respect over affection. My mother showed up at my apartment unannounced 2 days after the ownership transfer became public record. She didn't call first. Just appeared at my door looking exhausted and older than I remembered. We stood in my doorway for a long moment, neither of us quite knowing how to start this conversation. She didn't yell or accuse. She just asked one simple question. Was it worth it? Destroying your relationship with your family over business ownership. I looked at her carefully, really studied her face. This woman had raised me, taught me manners, made me breakfast before school. But she had also called me a disgrace publicly. Had tried to gaslight me about my own experiences. Had chosen my brother over truth repeatedly. At some point, I said quietly, you have to choose between being loved conditionally and being respected. I spent my whole life trying to earn your approval. It never came. So yes, choosing myself was worth it. She stood there silently. No argument. No defense. No apology either. Just silence. I didn't destroy this family, I continued. The family was already broken. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. She left without another word. We both knew there was nothing else to say. Some relationships can't survive honesty. 6 months later, Bennett Construction was profitable again for the first time in 3 years. The independent audit had revealed more problems than even I suspected. We cleaned house completely. New management team with actual qualifications. Transparent accounting systems. Ethical contracts that didn't involve kickbacks or fraud. I restructured the company's foundation division, the part that handled scholarship programs and community projects. Renamed it under my grandmother's maiden name, Whitmore Foundation. Not Bennett. A fresh start built on her values instead of the family's broken legacy. The same relatives who once called me a disgrace now introduced me differently at family gatherings I occasionally attended. This is Camille. She runs the company now. Said with forced smiles and careful politeness. The family dynamics had permanently shifted. My brother worked at a mid-level position with a regional firm now. Humbled. My father played golf and avoided talking about business. My mother told her friends I was very focused on my career. We maintained polite distance. But the real victory wasn't controlling the company or proving them wrong. The real victory was that I no longer needed their validation to feel worthy. I had finally chosen myself over their approval. That was the only thing I ever wanted but had been too afraid to claim. And now I understood something fundamental. Sometimes being the disgrace just means you refuse to stay silent. And that was perfectly fine with me.